The Bank of Canada has cut interest rates for the first time since March 2020. The central bank lowered its overnight rate by 1/4 of a point from 5 to 4.75%. While Canada may be out of the inflation woods, the government's welcome today's news.
Canada is the first G7 country where interest rates have been lowered. Our economic plan is working, and that is really welcome news for Canada and Canadians.
The plane hasn't been landed yet, so we're not cheering yet. But I would say the runway's in sight. But we still need to land this.
Well, today's news changed political tactics in Ottawa. The Power Panel is back with me: Sherelle Evelyn, Tim Powers, Jordan Likeness, and Michelle Cadario. Michelle, if you look at federal polling over the last 2 years, you really start to see that the Liberals dropped significantly last summer as the Bank of Canada hiked its policy rate to about 5%. Do you think that this cut and potentially more cuts later this year will put the Liberals back into contention? Does this help them politically?
Well, without question, it's a glimmer of hope. And it's a glimmer of hope for Canadians who, as Tim referenced earlier, who are renewing their mortgage and might start to see, if they're on a variable rate, some money in their pocket at the end of the month that they'd been previously kind of a little bit over leveraged for. It sounds like that inflation, the underlying inflationary factors, maybe they'll start seeing it at the supermarket. That's all going to take a little bit of time to sink in. And I don't think that anybody's kind of, getting out their parade hats just yet. It's a glimmer of good news, and it sounds like things are going in the right way. But I don't think that it's going to turn everyone's fortunes over overnight. But it just does give them a little bit of a talking point. It gives them something to actually kind of be a little bit more confident about, especially as the House breaks and all the MPs are backing their ridings. And hopefully it's something that Canadians might be put in a better mood if they think that that interest rates are kind of on that more of a decline curve. So the government needed it, and without question, if the opposite had happened, it would have been bad news for the government.
Yeah, and just to put that in perspective, 3 in 10 homeowners with a mortgage had a variable rate mortgage, according to the Bank of Canada. So today, a significant number of Canadians just got a break. They just, they're going to be saving, maybe not a ton of money, but they're going to be saving a little bit of money every month because of this rate cut. And there could be more to come later this year. Tim, does that mean the Conservatives have to change their messaging at all? I mean, they've been railing against the government for the cost of living crisis. Do you think that this cut will take a little wind out of their sails?
JP, I know you're a modern man, so you probably don't drive a car, but have you driven a car lately, JP?
I haven't, actually.
Have you? Well, what you find out is the price of gas is still pretty high, and people are still paying carbon tax on that if you're flying. So, yeah, look, I'm sure I agree with Michelle. It's probably more important internally to the Liberals, to those who are doubting the Prime Minister right now, because the Liberals have long argued, look, things will start to turn around a little bit this summer. There'll be some economic improvement. But the political reality, and to your question around the Conservatives, is as long as that carbon tax is there, as Conservatives describe it, as long as the other affordability challenges are there that you encounter on a daily basis, I don't think they're going to change their approach much at all. The other challenge the Liberals have, and again, borne out in polling data, fairly or unfairly, the Prime Minister still down in very low places when it comes to popularity, and he being the brand of the government, front and center in the brand of the government, this is not going to alter the view in the next 6 or 7 months, I suspect, of how Canadians view Justin Trudeau. And while he's front and center, they're going to have to wear everything else. That's just the cruel nature of politics.
Yeah, Jordan, the NDP in particular, although we've heard from the premiers as well, but the NDP in particular has been pretty critical of the Bank of Canada. The parties kind of blame Tiff Macklin in part for what we're dealing with inflation because higher rates drives up housing costs, a lot of inflation driven by higher mortgage payments and higher rents. What do you make of this cut, and what do you see for the political implications of this?
Well, I don't think you're going to find anybody more relieved about the cut than the folks in the Liberal cabinet, that's for sure. But I agree a bit with what Tim is saying, which is that the Prime Minister's own personal unpopularity now, I think it really makes it difficult for people to hear this as good news that's coming from the Liberal government. The Liberals are really, they're squeezed, right? They're squeezed between the Conservatives, who are being so active and owning the issue on carbon tax, and the NDP that's really getting out there and agitating even more on the issue of affordability and cost of living. We saw them out this week with proposals to bring in hard caps on grocery prices. The Liberals have been pretty ineffective in bringing those prices down, even though that's been an issue over the last couple of years. And I think, while the rate cut is important, and maybe it could be the beginning of the end, it's still very, very far away to see any substantial cuts. And also the prices, the increases that we've seen over the last couple of years, they're not going anywhere. So prices are just growing more normally now. But what that means for people in those day-to-day costs and things like groceries, things like their rent, which is also not going to go down, that means that I think it's going to be really tough for them to hear this as good news that actually belongs to the government. They're really going to be feeling that pain in their pocketbook still.
Sherelle, do you think this rate cut moves the needle at all? I know some Liberals are kind of counting on rates coming back down to earth that give them a little bit of a boost as we head into next year. I've heard that from their mouths. This is not just my theory. They do think that interest rates coming down will alleviate some of the anger, some of the hatefulness we've seen from some people towards this government. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if it helps them get to sleep at night, I think that is very important. That's good for them. It is interesting watching the Liberals kind of do a victory lap on this, because you also have in the same or in very closely adjacent breath talking about how independent the Bank of Canada is and how one has nothing to do with the other. Obviously, yes, there are policy implications between both, but it is always interesting to see everybody kind of take credit for something that the bank does and then preach how independent the bank is in the kind of the same move. Unless this rate cut was going to be drastic, which nobody was expecting, it is not going to move the needle as much as I think people would want, people being the Liberals. And it's something that the Conservatives have seized on, is that something that the Bank of Canada governor has said, rates are not going to go back to where they were pre-pandemic. They are still going to be high. So even if you are renewing your mortgage, if you're renewing it tomorrow, if you're renewing it next year, if you're renewing it potentially the year after, it's not going to go back down to that bargain basement rate that it was. And that's something that they are seizing on, and that's something that they are hoping to drive home and say, hey, this is now Justin Trudeau's fault. We're ignoring everything else that has happened in the last few years that may have affected the necessity for rates to go up, inflation. Maybe there was a pandemic, maybe there were some wars, maybe there's some droughts, all of those things. Though, if you can pin it on, it is Justin Trudeau's fault that you're paying more for your mortgage. It doesn't matter when the election is. They are going to hear, I think, that message more because they're feeling it more in their bank accounts.
Yeah, Tiff Macklin saying today that rates won't go back to where they were in COVID, but they won't even go back to where they were pre-COVID in 2019. Not anytime soon, at least, if they do. So he's trying to prepare consumers for them to stay higher for longer, even if there are cuts coming. Michelle, there's a double-edged sword, though, when it comes to rate cuts, because a lot of folks I was talking to today, especially in the real estate sector, are saying that this has the potential to actually juice home prices, because there's a lot of money that's been sitting on the sidelines waiting for a rate cut. This could actually push up the price of homes. Is that something the government has to be on guard for?
Well, it's just a factor of the economy, and it's a factor of the markets, right? When things are more affordable, people buy more. When they have cash on hand, they're going to buy it. And if it's cheaper cash, if it's cheaper to get a mortgage, it only makes sense. And probably the financial advice that they're getting is to invest at that time. So I don't know that the quarter cut is going to have that great of an impact. But certainly, the speculators out there, with the, some of the underlying kind of fiscal numbers that were released today, and the general opinion that is going to start kind of coming down without the economy being too hot and overly heating for inflation, then, undoubtedly things are going to play. It's always a vicious cycle. And, it goes back to, in government, you're always blamed for everything that goes wrong that's out of your control. You're an easy target. The Prime Minister is probably the most recognizable person in the country, and if someone doesn't like something, it's probably his fault in their mind. But unfortunately, the flip side of that is it doesn't come to pass either. He won't get credit for any of this, quite frankly, nor should they. And I would caution the government about being, too far out there on a limb, pointing to interest rates, because, as we've seen, everything is very uncertain in these times, and so I would be cautious, quite cautious.
Tim?
Yeah, look, you don't want to go too fast in inflating expectations about the significance of some things. And they've tried to make the point of separation, whereas the Conservatives have linked it. So why would they give the Conservatives that linking opportunity again? Look, for certain, for the average person, this is pretty good news. But the broader environment of challenge is still out there. There's still anger out there. A rate cut, as important as it is, the 25 basis points, though, unfortunately, is not going to pop the balloon of anger that is out there. And I think voters are still looking for a way to expend that. So until the Liberals, the cat apparently is angry too there, JP, chasing the chipmunk she brought in earlier. So until the Liberals figure out how to get rid of that anger without getting rid of themselves, they've got lots of challenges.
Yeah, Jordan, there was a new Nanos poll out yesterday, and it shows that inflation, jobs, and the economy, those are still the top two issues. Other things are drifting down. Healthcare's drifted down. Climate change really dropped down. People just aren't concerned about those things, at least at this point, if we're to believe the numbers from Nanos. What do you make of this then? Like, is there something... Like, what does the government do? I mean, I feel like we talk about this all the time, but it's like there's nothing they can really do overnight. But inflation, jobs, and the economy, those are the motivating things for a lot of voters right now. What do they have to do to try and bring some of those people back into their tent? Because they've lost a lot of people that are saying those are the top issues for them.
Yeah, they really have. And you're right. Look, this is very tough to turn around a 20-point gap. I think that if there was a magic answer, hopefully the Liberals would do it. And there are those who think a leadership change is that magic wand. I do think that one thing that they could do is change how they're talking about some of these challenges. We saw Deputy Prime Minister Freeland out when she was reacting to the news about the rate cut, sort of have a message that said, our policies are working, our approach is working, rates are coming down. And I do think that sort of taking credit for this, not only is it maybe a bit of a risky thing to do, because what the bank gives, the bank can also take away, of course, but also it's not really very forward-looking. And it continues a pattern of messaging with this government where they're really out to sort of say to voters, look at all the great stuff we've done for you. But unfortunately, for them, in elections, it's really forward-looking. People want to know what they're doing for them in the future and how that's going to connect to what's going on in their lives right now. And I think that that's still a really big gap in how the Liberals are communicating on these issues. They need to actually show a little bit of a change from their past approach, because as we can see from the polls, their past approach is not really resonating with people. Whether or not at an empirical level it's actually helped or made a difference, that is actually, unfortunately for them, less important than the feeling that's out there right now. And they need to respond to that.
Sherelle, final thoughts to you quickly, please.
Yeah, I just would, harken back to what Armin said in your economist panel earlier, is that, 18 to 24 months for what a central bank to do to kick in. That's way too much time right now for the Liberals. They don't have 18 to 24 months. And that's unfortunate because the rate cuts, messaging, all of those things, none of those are going to change people's moods and minds overnight.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to the Power Panel, Sherelle Evelyn, Tim Powers, Jordan Lightness, and Michelle Cadario. Thanks, guys.